Thank you. So yeah, as Bhushan introduced me, I'm Nikhitha Kishore, and I'm coming from McAfee. I'm a lead estate there, and I've been with McAfee like for the past 6 to 7 years, and most of the times in McAfee, I work with network security solutions, home network security solutions mostly, which we install in consumer spaces, and as a part of that, I have worked with multiple global ISPs into integrating McAfee solutions into a lot of consumer homes and spaces. So yeah, as Bhushan told, I'm really passionate about this topic, IPv6. So what we are going to be talking about here is whether security in IPv6 enable home networks, whether the users or as home users or homeowners, whether there yet, whether the security is there yet, are we security ready yet? So let's hop into the topic. So we'll just go to the agenda. So what I'll be covering is about IPv6 overview, about IPv6 features, what all security attacks are there, and whether our smart home ecosystems are really prepped up for all these attacks and whether they have enough prevention mechanisms in the homes. And finally, we'll just go through some best practices that we can go through with a secure home network. Now, before we go to IPv6 overview, like what is IPv6, we'll just start from what an IP address is. So every device, any of your device which is connected to internet has an IP address. And the IP address is the way by which devices communicate to each other within a network. So when the internet started, it was not as commercialized as we see now. And most of the times it was limited to military or academia. So it was just a method which was used to communicate between 2 or 3 systems inside a university or to transfer information, encrypted information in military. But during the commercialization of internet, which started around 1990s, that is where we started the boom of internet, and the number of devices which started using internet significantly increased. So if you see the number of the number of smart home devices came in the recent decade. If you see even the mobile devices or the laptops or the gateways, everything started increasing, and internet kind of became a way of life, right? We have our Alexas and Googles, and even things in our consumer space which we never thought would connect to internet, like fridge or oven. All of these things are now getting connected to internet. Now, what does that mean? The more the number of devices that are connected to internet, the more the number of IP addresses that are required as well. And the more the number of IP addresses means initially when internet started, we used to use an addressing mechanism called IPv4, and IPv4 is still used predominantly across networks. So what IPv4 means is that the addressing system gives you a 32-bit address space. That means your addresses, any of your addresses, when you just check your laptop to which you're connected now, you can see an IPv4 address, something like 192.168.1.10 or something like that. So that address is a 32-bit address. And when I say a 32-bit address, how many number of addresses are possible with IPv4? 2 raised to 32 addresses are possible with IPv4. The thing is, as I told, with the commercialization of internet, the number of devices increased, and that means the more the number of IPv4 addresses are also required. So IPv4 allows, like what we can say, a maximum of 4.3 billion addresses, which is not really the need now, right? We have so many devices that we connect. Even in a home, the parents have devices, the children have devices. So IPv4 is slowly getting depleted, or we can say it is getting depleted. We circumvent it by using methods like NATing and all that, but it just slowed down our networks. So because of this, in 1998, IETF, or the Internet Engineering Task, called IPv6. And what IPv6 does is it is a 128-bit addressing system. And when you say that it's a 128-bit addressing system, it means that now you are able to have 2 raised to 128 addresses. And 2 raised to 128 addresses is good enough for whatever devices are there in the present or coming in the future. That many addresses are possible with IPv6. So this is where IPv6 come into picture. IPv6 is really required. It is the need of the time and the space that we are actually living in. We'll just see a difference between IPv4 and IPv6. So as we see the IPv4, as I told, it's a 32-bit address space. And this is commonly how an IPv4 address looks like. And in the case of IPv6, since we have 128-bit address, right? Usually what we do is we divide the 128 bits into 8 16-bit blocks. So this is how the entire IPv6 address, an actual IPv6 address looks like, what we do is each of the block, we convert it into a 4-digit hexadecimal number, which is then separated by colon symbols. So it looks very complex. An IPv6 address actually looks very complex. It is not as easy as, like, suppose your ISP support person is calling and asking you, hey, can you just read me out your IPv4 address? It's quite simple to do that, but it is not very simple to read out an IPv6 address. But it is as I told, it's the need of the time, right? Now, let's just go through some of the IPv6 features. The most important feature is definitely the larger address space, the 2 raised to 128 addresses, which I told. When I say 2 raised to 128 address, imagine it's like kind of 1,564 addresses per square meter of the earth. That much amount of addresses is there with IPv6. So that is the first and the foremost feature due to which we are adopting to IPv6. The second one is simplified header. What I mean by simplified header is, yeah, definitely IPv6 packet will be larger than IPv4. That is expected because the address space is, 4 times than that of the IPv4, right? But the header is being simplified in the sense that most of the unwanted information, which we call as options and all that, is pushed down into the header, and only the most important information is kept on the top of the header. It does a lot of advantage, especially when routing. That is one of the feature which I have written, faster forwarding / routing. Since the routing is now on the top of the header, it helps in quicker routing. So that is the advantage of having a simplified header. The third one is end-to-end connectivity. What is the advantage of end-to-end connectivity is that now you have NAT in IPv4. So wherever you don't have a complete, I cannot have a unique IPv4 address for my device. Whereas with IPv6, I can have an absolutely unique IPv6 address, and I can, without any NAT, communicate to any other device which is outside my network. Yeah, that might not be always true because there might be a lot of firewall rules in your organization. You might be having personal firewall rules as well, but still it reduces the complexities that NAT brings in. So that is what I mean by end-to-end connectivity. The fourth one is auto configuration. And this is a really cool feature of IPv6 because for every device that we have, as I told, it needs an IP address. But where does it get the IP address? We don't sit and configure the IP address, right? What we do is, what actually happens is there will be a DHCP server in your network, and the DHCP server usually sends out or advertises, okay, this is the IP address that you can use. This is the actual IP address that I have in the pool of addresses that is available. So that is one of the advantage with that is how IPv4 IP address allocation happened in IPv4. But with IPv6, the good thing is that you don't actually need to have a DHCP address. There is actually a counterpart like DHCP-V6, but even if DHCP-V6 is not present in your network, the device itself can auto-configure an IPv6 address for itself from the MAC address that it has. And one of the major advantage with that is that this address, this auto-configured address, using that address, it can talk to any other device in its own LAN segment. So auto-configuration is another feature of IPv6. And there was one more thing called IPsec. I just put it there, but it is not anymore a mandatory feature of IPv6. What I mean is that previously, when IPv6 came as a standard, the IPsec was mandatory. And by IPsec, if IPsec is there in your network, that means your data is encrypted and authenticated, right? But later on, it was removed from the specification. Like, it is not mandatory. You can add it or you cannot add it. Most of the times we don't add it because IPsec as such causes a lot of packet drops. So that is the reason why we go for that. The next thing is extensibility. As I told, there are a lot of options to add a lot of other options into your header, which allows for a lot of information that you can append and add and into the extension header, which is there with IPv6. So that is another feature, extensibility. So as I told, IPv6 has a lot of good features. It comes with, most importantly, the bigger address space is the biggest feature that it offers. But even with all of that, what we should be really thinking about is when IPv6 is coming to your home networks, are you security ready or not? Whether the home networks are security ready or not enough for that. So when we can think it like this: is the protocol secure enough? Is IPv6 inherently secure than IPv4? We cannot say that it is. It is neither more secure than IPv4. It's not true either ways, right? The problem with IPv6 is that, yeah, definitely security attacks are possible with IPv6. Like any protocol, no matter how many new protocols are going to come, attackers are going to find your way into the network, right? So with IPv6 also, security attacks are possible. But in home spaces, the problem when IPv6 come is that when your ISP deploys IPv6 in your network, most of the time the users is oblivious to it, right? How many users will even know about IPv4 address? Come on, how many even will be knowing about they have an IP address? So along with that, now the ISP brings in something new called IPv6. So IPv6 might come, and even the most secure home user, the user with a lot of security solutions installed in his house, he might be unaware of this newcomer that is IPv6. So even if you have installed all security solutions, they might just work with your IPv4 solution, with your IPv4 addresses. But IPv6 might introduce new problems and the user might not even be aware of it. It's like you create a big house, you have created all doors and you have door locks, etc. But now somebody has come and created a new backdoor for your house, and now the attackers can just creep in. That is how IPv6 would become eventually if the users are not aware of this new thing in your house, in your home networks. So I'm not going to elaborate much about the security attacks in IPv6 because a lot of ways you can attack IPv6 network. Like any other network, there are billions of ways, millions of ways in which you can attack. Attackers are going to come and find out those ways. But I'll just brief about some of the most popular attacks which has been studied throughout our IPv6 studies and research and all that. One of the most important thing is reconnaissance attack. As the name suggests, reconnaissance means knowledge gathering. So what reconnaissance attacks do, even in IPv4, is that it collects the information in the network. So in IPv4, it's very simple. You can just do a ping sweep and you can understand, okay, how many hosts are connected to the network and how many of them are how many of them have open ports, how many system vulnerabilities are there. A simple ping sweep will help you to do all of that. But in the case of IPv6, that is not possible. It's very cumbersome with IPv6 because if you're going to do a ping sweep with the amount of IPv6 addresses that can be possible in a LAN segment, you are just going to wait forever. So ping sweep is definitely not possible, but attackers has found new ways by taking advantages of the vulnerabilities in DNS and DNSSEC, etc., etc. And you can definitely do reconnaissance attack. Similar to that, we have other attacks like extension header, which utilizes the extensions which are available in the IPv6 header. The attacker can just add some wrong routing information and can just route the packets to networks where ideally the attacker's traffic would not be actually allowed. So those are extension header attacks. And similarly, you can have neighbor discovery protocol attacks. What is a neighbor discovery protocol attack? It is very similar to ARP attacks, right? So ARP is neighbor discovery protocol is the counterpart of ARP in IPv4. So both of them are used to discover the MAC addresses of the devices which are connected into the network. So neighbor discovery protocol as such lacks something called authentication, and the user can actually utilize that and use that in order to identify the details of the devices in the network and try to peep into the network. The next one is DHCP-v6 attack. I told DHCP-v6 is not really required. We can still auto-configure the IPv6 addresses for each device, but most of the time people go for DHCP-v6. Now, the reason why people go for DHCP-v6 is because when a DHCP server announces itself a DHCP-v6 address to the devices in the network, it also gives a set of network configuration. Like it allows the device connected to the router in order to understand, okay, what kind of DNS server I should point to, whether there is a DNS mask in the network, and a couple of details like that. So DHCP-v6 is quite commonly used. And DHCP-v6 also, the communication is not actually, the authentication is not there much. And similarly, the attacker can always utilize that in order to get inside the network. Now, apart from all of this, the attacker or a hacker can utilize the way ISP has deployed IPv6 in your network. So ISP can deploy IPv6 in your network mostly in three different ways. Like either they can go for a dual stack, or they can go for a protocol translation, or they can go for something as simple as tunneling. So either they can just tunnel your IPv6 data through an IPv4 network, or they can have dual stack where IPv4 nodes communicate with IPv4 networks and IPv6 nodes communicate with the IPv6 network. It is as simple simple like let's say you are browsing screensavers.com, and screensavers.com does not have an IPv6 address. So what you do is, what the device would do is, or the router, what it will do is, it will simply route it through the IPv4 network. But let's say the user is browsing google.com, it has IPv6 address. So instead of taking the path of IPv4, it is going to take IPv6. So that can also be one way in which ISP can deploy. Or the ISP can go for something as simple as protocol translation. Protocol translation is, the ISP has IPv6 networks. It has pure IPv6 network. But for some reason, or maybe the user's network is not, or the traffic which the user is browsing does not support it. So the ISP just does protocol translation, translates the IPv4 traffic to IPv6 and vice versa. So these are the three main ways in which ISP can actually deploy IPv6. Even these three methods are not actually error-free. There are a lot of problems because IPv6 is currently new. It is new and most of the people are just catching up. The attacker can anytime take advantage of what all vulnerabilities are there and get inside the user's network. So what I'm trying to say with this slide is that, yes, security attacks are possible in IPv6 just like in IPv4. But whether our smart home security solutions, we use a lot of security solutions in our home. We might use an antivirus, we might use firewalls, we might use VPNs. Whether all of these solutions that we currently have in our home, are all of these IPv6 ready? Is your network actually secure from IPv6 attacks, or is it just protecting you from IPv4, which would be kind of very futile? You might be still under the attack of a hacker. So coming to smart home networks, as I told in the very first slide itself, our homes have significantly transformed. It is not anymore just computers and gaming consoles or a couple of mobile devices. The way we live, it is with internet, right? You just ask Alexa to turn on the lights, turn off the lights. You can ask your washing machine to start off when you're not in the home, or switch off when you're not in the home, anything. So the way of life currently, it is mostly automated. That is, smart home automation has become a way of life for most of the people. So when I say smart home automation has become the way of life, means yes, your functionality has improved. There is a lot of ease in the way of living, but it comes at the cost of security. Are you secure enough? In a smart home network, the most vulnerable devices are definitely the IoT devices. IoT devices are a big attack vector inside a smart home device. The reason is because most of the IoT devices are headless devices. And what do you mean by a headless device is that if you see, just look at a CCTV camera or a door lock, most of these doesn't have a console. When I say a console, that means that when you open your Google Chrome, and you cannot open a Google Chrome browser in your CCTV and go, okay, let me download an antivirus solution, let me download a network security solution, install in it, and say, oh, okay, my CCTV camera is secure. So that is not kind of possible with most of the IoT devices. These are headless devices. So such devices, since they are not protected, or the user doesn't take much effort to secure these devices, it becomes an easy path for the cyber criminals or the hackers to just infiltrate your network via the IoT devices. And you can imagine a lot of ways. Even recently, we have seen using Ring device. There was an attack, it was a famous attack using the door lock, the Ring door lock. An attacker was able to hijack into the home network, and he was able to bully a child. So these kind of attacks are very common with IoT devices, and people really don't know it. Now, the problem with IPv6 is that along with all these attack vectors, it introduces a new attack vector which the user is really not aware of. So in this presentation, what we will go through is that, or what we will assume is that, we have a home, and this home has a lot of security solutions in place, right? It has all the really required security solutions in place. And we are going to evaluate whether these are IPv6 ready, or whether this house is actually protected from IPv6 attacks or not. So a typical home, a smart automated, this is not a very big diagram, which I did not want to create like that. So what I did is I just categorized the devices. I just categorized it into the webcam. It ideally just represents all the IoT devices. And then there is some laptop, desktop, MacBooks, where the user stores a lot of his personal data. And then there might be mobile devices, iPads, any of your personal gadgets, and all those things which moves in and out of the network. So this is how a typical home looks like. Now, what we will do is we will take a look at each security solution inside a home, and we'll see how much they are IPv6 compatible or not. So the first one that we are going to look is virtual private network. or a VPN. So VPN, everybody must be knowing VPN because we often connect using VPN to our university networks or to our office networks and all of those, right? So what VPN essentially does is it makes your traffic invisible online. So it basically encrypts your data through a tunnel, and it kind of gives you a fake IP address so that your presence is kind of invisible online. And VPN is not just a privacy software. It's not just going to give you privacy. It helps you with security also. And if you have devices which move it from your house and it gets connected to public internets, like you're going to cafe, you connect to that, you go to a hotel, you connect to the internet there. If you have such devices, then definitely VPN should be there. All of the people should have a personal VPN installed in the devices, which often move in and out of your home networks. Now, when it comes to VPN, the real question is whether most of the VPNs out there are IPv6 compatible or not. The answer is that most of them don't have IPv6 endpoints. Most of the VPNs which are available in the market, they don't have IPv6 endpoints. This means that when you're establishing a tunnel, they don't essentially establish to a IPv6 endpoint. There can be two things that can happen in such a case. What happens when a VPN doesn't have an IPv6 endpoint? One thing is that the VPN might have a fallback mechanism. What I mean by a fallback mechanism is that the VPN can block all the IPv6 traffic, and whatever traffic was going through IPv6, it makes it to fall back to an IPv4 traffic. So the good thing with that is, yeah, definitely the VPN is not allowing you to use IPv6 even though your ISP is giving you that. But the good thing is that you are secure. You are still under the security of the VPN tunnel, right? So that is one thing. If that is the case, then good. You are secure. You're still secure. Your devices which has VPN are still secure. The traffic is good enough. But there can be a case, or there might be a lot of cases like that, where the VPN neither has an IPv6 endpoint, nor does it make it fall back to IPv4. So that means when the user looks at his device, his VPN might be activated. VPN might be running. The beautiful tick mark might be enabled. But all this traffic through IPv4 is not encrypted. It's not going through the tunnel. So even though you are doing a bank transaction over a VPN, you might be under the illusion that I'm secure. But what if the bank has an IPv6 address, so your traffic is not any more secure? So that is one of the problems of not having an IPv6 endpoint. So whenever somebody is going to purchase an VPN, it is essential to ask this question, whether you are dual stack compatible, whether you are IPv6 ready. That is one important question to ask. And the second thing is, the VPNs doesn't solve one issue. You can't have a VPN software in most of the IoT devices, like your baby monitor or your Alexa or even your fridge or your washing machine, which is connected to internet. They are not going to have any VPN. So what to do in such kind of cases? The good thing is that there are a lot of things called router VPNs. You can buy a router which has VPN enabled in it. It doesn't take much configuration with the kind of modern routers we get. The advantage with that is that all the network in your home is going to get routed through this network now, which has a VPN in it. The router is going to tunnel all the traffic from all the devices in your home through through a tunnel. So there is no need to sit and worry about each and every traffic in your home network, because the router will take care of it. But that doesn't mean that you should not be having personal VPNs for devices like mobile phones or laptops. You should still have personal VPNs, because when you are moving in and out of the network, going to a public space, VPNs should always be enabled. So that is all with virtual private network. Let us move to the next one, which is host-based firewalls. We'll cover both host-based firewalls and network-based firewalls. So with host-based firewalls, what I mean by what is a firewall? A firewall is we always hear firewall. So firewall is nothing but a piece of software which has a couple of rules which allows for filtering or blocking any unauthorized network access into your network. So host-based firewalls can come in two different ways. It can come either by default with your OS, or it might be even with your any security solution that you have purchased and installed in your devices. So each of these firewall solutions, what they do is they have a default set of solutions which says that, okay, you are not supposed to allow port forwarding into this device, or you should not have open ports in this device. So all these are the kind of rules that firewalls enable. Now, when you say host-based firewalls, it is very important that most of the host-based firewalls will have default settings for IPv4 addresses. It will have all security, all kind of rules enabled. It might have all filterings enabled for IPv4 addresses, but it might not be having IPv6 for IPv6. So the user has to go ahead and go to the administrative UI of the firewall and sit and say, okay, duplicate whatever is there for IPv4 as such for IPv6. And similarly, it is important that a host-based firewall should block all kind of unwanted tunnels that IPv6 use. Now, IPv6 definitely use tunnel. There are some IPv6 tunnels which are useful. But there are some kind of tunnels like pseudo tunneling, which BitTorrent uses. Most of the time, BitTorrent is, we have seen that BitTorrent uses something called a pseudo tunneling. And I'll just tell what a pseudo tunnel is. What it essentially does is it takes an IPv6 packet, it encapsulates in an IPv4 UDP packet, and it transmits it over an IPv4 network until the IPv6 network is reached. The problem with that is a lot of networks will have rules in order to detect and prevent torrent users or torrent data and all those things. But with this method, with this tunneling, we are completely evading that kind of data. This means that the user will be able to inject unwanted or malware injected data into your systems. So the host-based firewall should have the capacity to block all kinds of unwanted tunnels. So that is one of the other thing with host-based firewalls. Definitely, all of this cannot be achieved by a home user, right? Most of them just see, you buy a computer, okay, you just turn on the firewall and you just leave it over there. Most of them just go with the default lax settings. And even if you want to enable all these things, it means that the user should have a nuanced understanding of his network, like what are his network and how many devices are there and what are the kind of traffic that I should be blocking. It's kind of unrealistic to expect that from a user, but still the user has to go ahead and enable at least default settings for both IPv4 and for IPv6. The next one is a network-based firewall. Now, the disadvantage with host-based firewalls, as I told, is mostly with IoT devices. IoT devices might not have these kind of settings. So you can have a network-based firewall. So what the network-based firewall will essentially do is it usually comes with the router. Router, what I mean, that is your home gateway, the modem which you connects to with the modem which gives you internet, right? So you can always log into your router and you can go to your router's web UI and you can enable network-based firewall rules from them. These kind of help you from a lot of attacks like disabling of port forwarding or disabling the access to your router's management UI from the outside users, that is the users who are basically in the WAN, the wide area network. And it might even have filters like bogon filters. So what I mean by bogon filters is that bogon IP addresses are IP addresses which are not reserved, which are not allocated. They don't have a particular purpose. Now, any traffic which has a source or destination with these addresses should be suspected. And if your router provides you bogon filtering, you should always go ahead and enable that. Now, again, the problem here is that all of these rules, like disabling the port forwarding or disabling the remote access, all of this might not be possible that it will be there for IPv6. Most of the times it is not there. When we work with OEMs, we have seen everybody is enthusiastic in writing rules for IPv4, but when it comes to IPv6, it is a little bit, you take a backward step because IPv6 is still, it is just coming and there is still a lot to be learned about it. So due to that, but if there is an option in your router in order to enable IPv6 firewall rules, network-based firewall rules, go ahead and always do it. That is really important. Now, when I talked about host-based firewalls and network-based firewalls, the most important thing that anybody would think about is, now, how am I going to sit and do this, right? It's not really possible. It is really not possible to understand the network. I should have some idea about IPv6 address. First of all, the address itself is not in a readable format. Why to bother about all these things? That is where a next-generation firewall really helps. A next-generation firewall usually have an intrusion prevention system. It has a malware detection. It has content filtering. It will have an SSL or SSH interception. It will even have QoS management. So what next generation firewalls do is they analyze the volumes of traffic that goes in and out of your network. And what it does is it tries to identify any kind of unknown traffic, any kind of suspicious traffic, and it keeps checking against the database for the kind of domain reputation, or if this data has malware in it, or whether this data is not supposed to come at this time. It looks like this is a botnet attack. In that case, the good thing with next generation firewall is that they usually keep a good list of botnet IP addresses. So we have recently found that 5% of CCTV botnet usually comes from IPv6 devices. So this means that even if your next generation firewall is going to protect you from all of this, in the case of next generation firewall, you really don't need any nuanced understanding of your network. It will take care of it. It is analyzing. It does all the analyzing on your behalf. It creates its own firewall rules, so no need to do all that. But it's important that even for a next generation firewall, when it is updating the botnet IPs, botnet IPv6 addresses are also updated. So next generation firewall also has this problem. And whenever a user buys a next generation firewall, and next generation firewalls are really costly, and if a user if a user is really ready to invest in such a large home automation system, then the user should be really ready to invest in the next generation firewall as well. The next generation firewall is applicable only once you have some kind of 70 plus devices in your network, right? In your own LAN segment, you have that many number of devices. In that case, you can go ahead and use a next generation firewall. But even for a next generation firewall, the question should be asked while purchasing or while understanding it, whether IPv6 networks is still protected using that. Another thing which users have to do in a home network is separating the network for IoT devices. Now, as I told, IoT devices usually contribute to a lot of home network attacks. So it is really important that your IoT devices are in a separate LAN segment than from your main devices. So what you can do is most of the routers allow for multiple Wi-Fis, right? So it allows for a main Wi-Fi and it allows for a guest Wi-Fi. And along with that, create a new set of new LAN segment altogether for your IoT devices. Now, the advantage with that is that even if your IoT network is compromised, it will not be able to infiltrate into your main network, where you will have devices through which you are going to access your bank details or your legal documents or any of those things. So even if IoT network is compromised, your main network is still protected. Now, when it comes to IPv6, this is where it gets really tricky. Most of the times when ISPs give you IPv6 network, they give you something called a /64 prefix. And what a /64 prefix means, it's something equivalent to subnetting in IPv4. And it means, just understand that if it is a /64 prefix, then it allows only for one LAN segment. So even if you're going to have 3 different Wi-Fi network, like for IoT a separate network, for main devices a separate Wi-Fi, and for the guest network a separate Wi-Fi, only the Wi-Fis might be different. The LAN segment might be inherently the same. So the user really has to go ahead and ask. The first ask when the user gets an IPv6 connection is, hey, I don't need a /64 prefix. I need a /56 or a /48 prefix. So when overall all these things are done, when we analyze all of these, when we go through a virtual private network or a host-based firewall or a network-based firewall or any of these security solutions, when we just look through that, it is so evident that it is very difficult to expect a user to go ahead and understand all these things, understand the nuances of network, or even understand, as I told you, the user might not even be aware that there's something called an IP address. And now you cannot just ask the user to go ahead and create IPv6 rules accordingly. So is IPv6 network security ready with respect to home networks? With respect to enterprise networks, it's a different story, because in enterprise networks, you're going to have an IT personnel dedicated to security. They are going to learn about it. They are going to update their rules accordingly. That person is there. But when compared to home networks, the user is completely oblivious to any of these actions, which the user might not even know there is something like that in his home. So the user is going to be totally unaware of the attacks which are going to come via IPv6. So IPv6 as a protocol has introduced a lot of stuff like SENT, which is a secure NDP specification. It has created something called an RA guard, which makes the protocol more and more strong in order for it to prevent other kind of attacks. But the thing is, all these specifications, to adopt these specifications into IPv6 networks, we are still at the mercy of we are still at the mercy of the ISPs, because ISPs need not take up all these new specifications. They can still go ahead with that 1998 specification of IPv6 and install that. So where lies this? With whom does it lie, actually? The security awareness. Who has to spread the security awareness? It is definitely the responsibility of the ISPs and the security solutions together to give solid and robust security solutions for IPv6. So I hope most of the ISPs and the security companies go ahead and do that. And one of the important things that any home user should be doing is that they should be frequently updating their security solutions, because a lot of security companies are keeping on updating their softwares which are compatible with IPv6. And you might be having those updates ready, but you might not be just updating them yet. So most importantly, go ahead and update your security solutions, and most importantly, ask the right questions. And I hope in the future, both the ISPs and the security solutions are going to be making the IPv6 network so smooth that our transition to an IPv6 world is so smooth. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Nikhitha. Do we have any questions for Nikhitha? Please send them via chat. So I have one, Nikhitha. Oh, okay. There is someone asking what kind of hardware uses IPv6 today?
All your devices has IPv6. So all the mobile phones which are out there, all your your IoT devices, even the laptops that you're using has IPv6 in.
Okay, we have a hand up.
I had a question. I missed the very beginning of your talk. What sort of categories of customers are using IPv6 in home networks versus business networks?
Most of the users, I think IPv6 adoption is quickly catching up. It's just a matter of time. If you see, even if you see my hometown, some areas has IPv6 in their network, some of them doesn't have. Most of the times when ISPs deploy IPv6, they don't usually announce it, right? They don't usually tell, hey, I am going to bring up IPv6 for you. It just comes in, and one day when you log into your computer, you might see an IPv6 address along with your IPv4 address. With respect to enterprises, most of the enterprises have IPv6 addresses, but what they try to do is they try to block the IPv6 traffic, because the security attacks under IPv6 is still under study, and most of the enterprises shy away from going into that direction and kind of blocks IPv6 traffic. But they might be still having IPv6 in labs, like where I come from McAfee, we have IPv6 in our labs, but not in our corporate networks. So that might be the case. But in case of home users, there is no categories, right? Any user can get IPv6.
Would this usually be being used for like IoT, like all your devices that might be, your light bulbs and so on?
Yeah, definitely. All your light bulb sensors, your Alexas, your Googles, everything can get an IPv6 address. And it is usually the IoT devices, whatever IoT devices is coming now into the market, they are all IPv6 compatible. They might not be pure IPv6, they might be dual stack. They'll have both IPv4 and IPv6 addresses. But the moment they detect there is an IPv6, your ISP supports IPv6, all the traffic is going to go through IPv6. So the very first IPv6 deployment happened in 2012, but at that time it didn't gain much traction. But what I have seen is all our CenturyLinks and Verizon's and Comcast, all of them have caught up with IPv6. Most of the areas in US or in India and all these things, we have seen IPv6 is prevalent in all the home networks.